Erik Haltman of RotoWire here with 6 players to consider adding to your fantasy baseball team. Let's start with Jordan Walker, outfielder for the St. Louis Cardinals, who is the sort of player you don't want to give up on too soon. If you remember, Walker had tons of hype before the 2023 season, and he wound up hitting well enough, had a brief demotion, but when he was in the majors, he had 16 homers and a 787 OPS. About a league average strikeout rate and about a league average barrel rate, which was encouraging for a 21-year-old, probably discouraging for a player who doesn't add much value with his legs or glove. But the thought was, okay, if he's a decent enough hitter already, he could be a much better than decent hitter at his peak. Now, 2024 was a disaster for Walker, unfortunately. He was demoted again, played just 51 games, had a 619 OPS when available. He still hit the ball hard, but his strikeout rate jumped all the way up to 28%. However, this year, there's some encouraging signs. Through 5 games, he has as many walks as strikeouts. He already has a homer, and he's already attempted 3 steals. Now, he's been caught twice, so I wouldn't necessarily expect him to suddenly turn into a speed demon. But the important part here with Walker is that he doesn't turn 23 years old until May, so there's still tons of time for him to make good on his promise. Up next, we've got Hunter Goodmen, catcher for the Rockies, who was an interesting deep league catcher option during draft season, mostly just because he plays half his games at Coors Field. The expectation was that Goodmen would back up Jacob Stallings behind the plate while occasionally starting in the outfield corners or at DH. But instead, Goodmen is playing every single day. He's the team's primary catcher, and when he's not catching, he's the DH. He's also moved up to the cleanup spot by the 3rd game of the year and has remained there ever since. Goodmen still has terrible plate discipline, 29% strikeout rate against a 4% walk rate, which is actually the exact same marks he had last year. But he already has a pair of homers and has a career 13% barrel rate. That looks like a player who has enough power to offset some very legitimate contact concerns, even in a more shallow one-catcher league. If Goodmen really is going to have this much playing time, and it looks like he will, I think he clears the bar to be worth adding in those 10 to 12 team one-catcher formats. Up next, we've got Jacob Wilson, shortstop for the Athletics, who was the 6th overall pick in the 2023 draft. Now, Wilson is a player of extremes, which means he's very useful in some formats and to some teams, and barely useful in others. Wilson struck out just 6.6% of the time in the minors last year, struck out 9.7% of the time in the majors in his 28-game debut. So, of course, if you're in a points league that penalizes for strikeouts, suddenly Wilson becomes a lot more interesting. Wilson only hit .250 last year in that brief debut, but if you keep a single-digit strikeout rate going for more than the 28 games he had last year, you're going to have a pretty good batting average sooner or later, which again means this is a player of extremes. If you're set on average and need power, don't look at Jacob Wilson, but if you are set on power and need batting average, you should probably already have picked up Jacob Wilson. Through his first 7 games, he has 0 strikeouts and is hitting .375. He already has a homer, which is interesting because he has 0 homers and 0 barrels in his brief debut last year. I'm pretty interested in most A's hitters this year, given their move to a much more hitter-friendly park in Sacramento, and I think Wilson is among the leaders in that group. I've got 3 more names for you in a minute, but first I wanted to mention that you can upload your league at rotowire.com and use our My Leagues feature to get personalized pickup recommendations based on our projections. It's something I do myself for my own teams, not because I'm a company man, but because it legitimately is a useful tool. Go to rotowire.com/try for a free peek behind the paywall to check out that feature as well as everything else we've got going on at the site. That's rotowire.com/try. Back to the names, we've got Jordan Hicks, who was converted from reliever to starter last season. And by the end of the year, he had a 4.10 ERA, but early in the season, it was a 2.33 ERA through his first 11 starts. I'm wondering if we might see something similar this year. Hicks wound up seeing his innings jump from 65 2/3 all the way up to 109 2/3. Kept that number from getting even higher by moving to the pen in late July. And I, again, wouldn't trust him to remain a useful starter all year, but I can buy Hicks being quite useful to a lot of fantasy teams in April and May, particularly because his velocity seems very good right now. You might remember Hicks as an absolute flamethrower as a reliever. His velocity averaged around 100. He could throw as hard as literally anybody in Major League history. But As a starter last year, he averaged 95, which is good velocity, but nothing too special. In his first start this year, though, he averaged 98.6, struck out 6, walked 2, allowed just 1 hit in 6 scoreless innings versus the Astros. There's some promise here, particularly early in the season before that workload wears him down. And there's also, in some formats, a bonus from his starting pitcher / relief pitcher eligibility. It's always good to stick an extra starter in your relief pitcher spots in certain formats. Another starting pitcher you could consider is Max Meyer of the Marlins. Meyer was a high potential prospect who peaked at 26 overall on the RotoWire Top 400 prior to his Tommy John surgery. And there was some excitement in his first year back from that surgery last year, but unfortunately he wound up looking like someone who had just returned from injury. Had a 5.68 ERA, 142 whip in 11 starts. Really just didn't miss enough bats, just an 18.5% strikeout rate. But Meyer added a sweeper this year and also improved his slider, which averaged 91 miles per hour and was his most used pitch in his season debut against the Pirates. Why we're still calling that a slider and not a cutter if it's at 91 and being used as often as a fastball is beyond me, but the point is the pitch works. He got 7 strikeouts, 1 walk, and 1 earned run in 5 2/3. I'm buying into a pitcher who was long thought to have lots of potential and looks like he's making good on that potential already this season. And finally, let's move to the bullpen, where I would go pick up Dennis Santana of the Pirates. Now, I would also get Luke Jackson of the Rangers because he definitely has the job in Texas. But Santana is out there in even more leagues and looks like he's the guy in Pittsburgh after David Bednar was demoted. Bednar had a very down season last year and 3 poor outings to start the year this year. Santana was already the next highest leverage guy when Bednar was still around, and then he got the first save after Bednar was sent down. So sure looks like he is the closer. Santana debuted back in 2018 with the Dodgers, had a 5.17 ERA and 143 whip through 2023, mostly because he was walking too many batters, a 12% walk rate. But last year, he cut his walk rate to 7%, and that ERA dropped all the way to 3.89. The whip dropped all the way to 1.09. Only a 24% strikeout rate, so between that and those ratios I just mentioned, not exactly closer material for most teams, even if he is a pretty good reliever. But, somebody has to do it, and the Pirates don't really have anybody else. If you're chasing saves, it's because you need saves, not because you need a tiny boost to your ratios. So go get Dennis Santana, or again, go get Luke Jackson, who's going to get you saves as well in Texas, even though he may not help your ratios all that much. That'll do it for today's video. Drop a like if you plan on picking up any of these names, and check out the Saturday edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast, where Ryan Boyer and I will go over 20 waiver pickups every single week for the next 6 months.